Hello world and welcome to the second video in this series on creating an IK driven procedural walk animation. Today we're going to be talking about what IK is and setting up IK for our character. My name is Mani and I make games. Let's go. So, what is IK? According to the Unity documentation, 2D IK automatically calculates for the positions and rotations of a chain of bones moving towards a target position. Simply put, it does this. We can set up an effector on our bone, or rather on our bone chain, which is our limb, and have a target for it to try to reach. And instead of having to pose each bone individually to reach a certain point, Unity does all the hard work for us. So, why bother setting up IK, and why go through all the trouble of doing procedural animation? Well, the answer is flexibility and ease of use. Firstly, if I were to use traditional bone animation, I would actually have to move each individual bone in the chain to reach the intended target. In this case, I want to put the foot on the camera icon, and then I would have to do this for each of the legs individually. Now this is kind of time consuming and there's no flexibility in this. To illustrate the second part of the problem, I'll call in the help of a little friend. This is my friend Mr. Stickman, who still lives in the era of traditional animation. He isn't a sprite flipped character, but he is a normal bone rigged character. Notice how it's all fine when he walks on level ground, but as soon as he reaches an incline, he starts walking on air. Don't worry, Stickman, we've got you covered. I want us to make some changes to our model in order to keep everything nicely organized and to improve our workflow. The first step in this is going to be to completely unpack the prefab. So we go right click on our prefab, go to prefab, and we'll say unpack completely. When you finish rigging your model and setting it up and are happy with it, you can prefab it to use in your different scenes again. First off, our model is set up in such a way that all the different sprites, the visual parts that you can see, are skinned and set up under the main transform. Then there's a transform here for the head. This is actually the bone system, the skeleton. Since we won't be working with these very much, we can get them out of the way to start with. So let's create an empty game object, and we'll call this part sprites. And let's move them in here. Now we have all the skeletal stuff in one place, and the part sprites in a different place. Next up, we'll need a place to store all our IK targets, which I'll explain about later. So we'll create an empty again and say IK targets. You can, of course, also call this lim targets or whatever works for you. Let's get to the parts about actually setting up IK. Now, you go to the root bone of your model, so the main bone in your skeletal system. If you're unsure if you've got the right one, just move it, and if the whole skeleton moves, you're good to go. Here we go, add component. You go IK Manager 2D. The IK Manager is basically responsible for running all the IK and moving the effectors to get closer to the targets. So let's set up our first leg. Go to leg 1, and we want to go to leg lower. When you're here, say create empty game object. We will call this effector leg 1. Now the effector is going to want to head towards the target. So we don't want our knee going to the target. So let's move our effector down and to the very end of that leg bone. Just to make sure. There we go. Make sure you get it as close to the tip that will be touching the ground as possible. When we've got our effector where we want it, let's just fix this. We can go ahead, click on it, press Ctrl D to duplicate it, and name the new object target. Now that we have our target and it's in exactly the same spot as the effector, we're going to move it to our IK targets over here. Before we go on, look at the structure. This is the main transform. The effector is a child of the limb that's at the end of our chain, while the target is not childed to the skeleton. The reason for this is that the effector is going to try to follow the target. So as soon as the effector moves the leg, if the target is childed to the leg, it's going to keep moving and you'll end up with a loop. If you actually try to make the target a child of this limb, Unity will simply just not solve and you won't have a working IK system. Right, now that we've set up our first effector and our first target, just a quick thing to do here. Let's mark our effector, give it a yellow diamond symbol, and let's grab our target and give it a green diamond symbol. This actually makes debugging any problems with your animation later a lot easier. Go to our head, go to our IK Manager 2D, and we'll add a solver. In our case, we only have 2 bones per limb, so we'll use a limb solver. If you look in the documentation, it lays out a further explanation about chain CCD and chain fabric solvers, which we won't be covering in this video. So let's go limb solver. Now you can see it automatically created a new solver for us. Let's give this something, a name that makes sense. So we'll call this solver leg 1. And let's go to our main transform. Create an empty game object, call it solvers. And let's put it under there. Now, looking at your solver, it's got several fields here. The ones that interest us are the effector and the target, and this field called flip. Now first, we grab the effector that we created. Put it there. And we grab our target and put it here. Notice how the leg immediately responded and tried to align itself to the target, but it's bending the wrong way around. So we toggle flip and it fixes the problem. Grab the leg target here. And you have just successfully set up your first limb for IK. Now I'm going to go ahead and start rigging the rest of these.
I want us to make some changes to our model in order to keep everything nicely organized and to improve our workflow. The first step in this is going to be to completely unpack the prefab.
Now that we've set up all our solvers, targets, and effectors, we can test it. Notice here, when you click on the solver, it's very easy to check that the right effector and the right target has gone into the solver, because you can compare the numbers on the right hand side. This is one of the great advantages of giving good names to your game objects and also your variables when you start coding. Okay, we've checked this through. Everything is fine in that regard. Let's pick up our targets and move them around. There's leg 1, leg 2, now that we have our spider all tied up in knots, let's just move everything back. We've now implemented IK on our spider and we've tested it. In our next video, we're going to start moving the spider body from side to side and getting it to start taking its first steps according to its movement. I'm Moni, and I'm saying goodbye.